No mai hari mai, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome back to the PowHer podcast. Today I am joined by Melissa Crawford. Now, Melissa is an expert in the future of work, and she's a bit of a unicorn too. She has a very rare skill set that unites both people psychology and technology. Melissa's got 2 technology degrees and over 20 years experience in people and organisational psychology. She is the director of Tech with Heart and a certified futurist. Melissa, it is an absolute pleasure to have you with us today on the show. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Jess. Thank you so much for having me. Delighted to talk with you.
Yeah, I'm keen to get into this conversation because I think I see so many people in the world that are good at one of these things. So like people that are really good in the tech space or people that are really good in the people space. It's not often you get someone with so much experience and skill across both because they can often compete. And I think, when we think about the future of work, we are so often talking about technology at the moment. And there's a huge people element to that in terms of then the knock-on effects. And so I'm excited to pick your brains and see what we can learn. And for the leaders listening in as well, what we need to be thinking about as well as we head into the future. So I know that I'm kind of way more in the people space than the tech space. And I am constantly thinking about what's our human point of difference and what will the role be for humans as leaders, if robots take over the world, etc. And I'm thinking, what is it that you see as sort of the people impacts from a psychology perspective as we look at how things are evolving in the tech space?
Yeah, well, one of the big things that I really want people to lean into at the moment is probably it was really compounded by a piece of research that came out by HBR this year that looked at the top uses of generative AI. And the number one use was for therapy and companionship. Now,
interesting.
In my work, I'm always looking for signals, and that was a massive signal. So where lots of HR practitioners have been kind of pulled into this around how is AI going to help with productivity? What is it going to mean for our workforce? All of those things are important, but as people, they're the only division that will potentially lean into the human side of it or the psychology side of it, which is where I really need them to double down. So if people are using outside of the workplace for personal, let's just say for personal use, they're using it and they're using it as a coach. They're using it as a therapist. They're using it to debrief their day. They're using it to talk about how do I have this difficult conversation with my manager because there's not really anybody else I can talk to, so I'm going to talk to this. Maybe I don't have any friends and I use it as talking to them about that. All of those different elements sends a bit of a message that there's a gap there. I mean, we already know from loneliness epidemic and, the lack of connection that there is a gap. And so I think that's really important for HR people to think about. What does that mean? If that's the message that we're getting is that globally there's these issues, how does that come into the workplace and what can they be doing to support that? But also there's an expectation. So if I'm talking to my AI and it gets me, it asks me about things, it remembers things that we've talked about before, and it's supportive, it's encouraging, it's, all of these things. And then I get to the workplace and my leader couldn't really care about me, certainly doesn't ask me about things and how things are going, doesn't asking me about my career development and what I'm interested in and or any of these sorts of things. There starts to be a real clear divide and clear gap between what I'm getting myself through these other AI tools and what I'm getting from the human. So, in other fields of my psychology stuff, I'm looking at the relationship stuff. So there is lots of people who are having relationships, in quotes, with their AI because it's a lot less work than they perceive from a real human because, this AI is interested in them, is engaging, talks to them in whatever style they want it to talk to them. Whereas, a human needs a little bit of two-way give and take. And so I just think this behavioral shift, if you think about the kind of underlying psychology of this, is fascinating. And your tech division's not going to be thinking about it. Your finance division's not going to be thinking about it. I need the people leaning into this.
Yeah. And there'll be a whole generation of people that come into the workforce in not too long a time that have grown up just talking to ChatGPT about all this stuff, right? And expecting then a whole, as humans, we don't always say, "Hey, that's a great idea," whenever you suggest something. And so there will be
Exactly.
that big gap. Um,
Yeah.
so how, in your opinion, how do we leverage this, because it can do so much and it is reshaping the way we work and live, and it is here to stay, clearly, but how do we leverage it without losing that human touch?
Yeah. So I think there's two sides to it. One is knowing that this is happening, knowing this is a trend, knowing this is a growing trend. Um, there are also gaps. We know resource wise in an organization that not everybody has the privilege of having a coach. We know not everybody has the support of people helping them with their personal development plan and kind of caring about their learning pathways and things like that. So I think if as a team, if HR was thinking, well, actually, how could we leverage this technology to provide a coach for every employee at every level? How could we leverage this to help them with their career pathway or their training pathway? Because they might not feel comfortable saying to their boss, "Look, my aim is to take your job, in a few years." Whereas we know from research, they feel far more psychologically safe talking to AI, which is where this is kind of coming from. So I think you can't fight it. There's no point in fighting it. So how could you use it and, to augment what you're doing, to kind of have it as a support thing? But I think also there's a big role for HR teams to be lifting the EQ, lifting the kind of humanity, the connection elements within their organizations, because otherwise, yeah, like unfortunately, there's a lot of focus on AI and putting in technologies in different companies. I don't see that same focus in actually how do we future ready our people as well, and and we already know from a lot of those reports that EQ, that kind of human intelligence stuff is going to become so important. I'm not seeing huge amount of investment going in that space.
Yeah, I think when I look at the majority of leaders, shall we say, it has been an underinvested space already, right? Before we even started to think and talk about AI. And like you say, it's getting less focused now, not more. And yet it will be a point of difference. And that stuff that we have to lean on more heavily as kind of this continues to evolve. So with that said, you mentioned sort of, that there is sometimes either a fear around this or a reluctance, or I don't understand it, therefore I'm not leaning into it. And I know that obviously when we read the stats from a gender perspective, there is the discussion around the bias that exists within AI because there's so many men involved in developing it. And then of course women being less keen on the uptake in terms of experimenting with it. What's your advice to those out there that might be leaning back from this and thinking, oh, I don't really know where to start, or it's all a bit difficult? What's your advice for how we can get involved and the stuff that we can start to do to make sure we are playing a role here and getting our voices represented on these platforms?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of your listeners will have had exposure to change frameworks like ADKAR, for example. And the first part of change in that model is awareness. And so we need to eat our own dog food, as they say, from an HR perspective, where we talk about growth mindset, we talk about learning and development. It's a bit like the chefs that don't like cooking at home, or the builders who have, half a house. I think you need to absolutely lean into that. And also, if you look at even the recruitment side of the HR stuff, will you be marketable? Are you creating a sustainable career for yourself? This is a tool that's not going to go away. It's only going to get more and more. And if you really are working in the people department, you need to understand the impact it's going to have, which means you need to be playing with it yourself so that you can kind of understand it. Kind of like I said before, there is a lot of focus on the techie side. And as you talked, I often, with no disrespect, because I have 2 tech degrees myself, but I use the term tech bros a lot. There are a lot of tech bros building this stuff. And they're not thinking about the human stuff. They're not thinking about how to help people through this change. They're not thinking about how to upskill them, how to keep them future-proofed, how to support the emotional side. Because there's also a real emotional side to this. So, somebody gets in there, plays with it, and realizes, crap, that does this faster than I could do it. And actually, quality's, if I'm honest, maybe better than I can do. That's quite confronting, right? But at least at least you're armed, and then you kind of look at, okay, so what does this mean and how do I operate with it? But if you're kind of holding back and the only people playing with it are looking at it from a productivity and efficiency lens and they're not thinking about that human side, then, I worry about the kind of long-term societal impacts of that. So, again, a little bit of a, what's the word? Can't think of the word here. Saying that all women have high EQ, but generally, we have a higher EQ on that. So we really need it in this space. So I often say, look, just get into these conversations. If you're putting AI into your company, this isn't a tech conversation. This needs to have people involved in it, because that's the kind of the role you talked about, the kind of unicorn two sides. That's the role I kind of play across being the bridge, because I'm like, look, you actually need to talk to you and you need to talk to you, actually there's such benefits from both sides, and there will be blind spots on both sides.
Yeah, and I think that's the missing piece. We're focusing on the tech, not so much the people or the impact on the people. Yes. And, especially when you think about, all the uses that you were talking about, the top uses, they're the stuff, when we're talking about therapy and coaching, that's the stuff that requires the most EQ, right? Yeah. And I guess then there's going to be these knock-on effects or consequences of, if I've used AI as a therapist or a coach, that potentially then I'm going off implementing that advice or making life decisions based on that advice, and then the potential mess that other humans may need to clear up after that happens.
Yeah.
So when we think about sort of AI, and what I'm hearing from your call, is that it's not necessarily that AI is going to replace all of our jobs, because there'll be always a human need as we implement future technologies. But what do you see as some of the biggest challenges we face, or some of those knock-on effects and consequences of how you're seeing it play out?
I personally worry about some power dynamic shifts and what that means for society as well. So, for example, when I did my first technology degree, it was that transition from paper to technology, way back in the day. And I really remember the cries of, computers are going to steal our jobs. This was the era of people had to learn how to use a mouse, how to save a file, how to print, it was
I remember that.
It was a real shift, right? And I think the same sort of thing is happening now. And people just need to kind of lean into that. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Can you repeat the last question?
So the challenges that we're facing in this space, some of the consequences and those knock-on effects of what you see as the sort of way the future is evolving from a tech point of view.
Yeah, thank you. So the power in society part, back in that first transition, there was a lot of, like, you remember, used to be typing pools. Yes. Where there was, loads of women that would sit and they would type stuff up, and so there was a lot of transactional kind of things that were replaced in that first kind of wave. This time is very different because it's coming for the knowledge workers, and in society, knowledge has been power. Mm-hmm. And I think that people are underestimating that this is super significant, because knowledge isn't going to be power. So, we already had started to see the shift that a leader was expected to be the person that knew everything. And then, actually, no, you don't just need to know everything. We kind of need you to like people as well and know how to manage them well. And there was, that kind of shift. When we come into knowledge as, out of the knowledge as power, that's quite significant if your whole sense of value and purpose and contribution is linked to your subject matter expertise, people coming to you for that value. And now they don't need to come to you for that value. They can just ask ChatGPT and it will probably whip you, let's be honest.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be quite challenging. And I think there's going to be some interesting behavioural things coming out of that as well. Mm. And in a lot of the traditional high knowledge roles, they've also been high salary roles. And so with that also often comes high power roles. And so I think that's quite uncomfortable for the people leading to know that in a lot of those cases, their foundations have suddenly become quite shaky and faster than they ever kind of thought. So I think that's going to be really significant. I would love more people thinking about that and thinking about the flow-on effect of what does that mean when, those sorts of people start to find it more difficult. to have their power, and how I've already seen it in companies with a little bit of kind of fighting and pushback on certain things, and I know it comes, that kind of old iceberg model, that it's actually some of the stuff underneath, and a lot of it is around their sense of where they are in this, how will this affect me, and the what's in it for me doesn't look good in a lot of cases with this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's that fear and scarcity then that we see
Yeah.
manifest in people when everything they've staked their career claim on might be under threat.
Yes.
But I think when I think of the point of difference or the opportunity that lies within that, then potentially as people leaders, and people like us have been saying this for ages, right? That it's not what you do in terms of your technical role, particularly as you progress up the ranks and get further
Yeah.
away from the front line.
Yeah.
It's who you are and how you lead, and that EQ, those very people skills, which
Yes.
it sounds like from a knowledge-based perspective, putting our eggs in that basket makes more sense
Yes.
leadership development wise to future-proof ourselves. I mean, what's your advice for leaders that are thinking, okay, what do I brush up on and upskill on to future-proof myself, given what you know?
Yeah. So I think you will have to be digitally savvy. You can't rely on the tech division now to kind of own that for you. You've got to step into it. So back to that earlier conversation, AI particularly, you need to be in there. You need to be playing because you need to understand what is starting to shape society.
Yeah.
I think the EQ side of things. So, part of the problem of why people will find AI a little bit better, and actually a very scary stat came out a couple of months ago that some of the AI is testing higher on the EQ testing than your average human.
Interesting.
Yeah, so people were like, "Oh, I won't be able to be creative," and already it's crept into that space. Oh, but it won't have the same EQ. Well, actually, it's better than a human who has no time to talk to you, who doesn't care about what's happening with you outside of work, who is too focused on the transaction. And unfortunately, there's a lot of those people who don't have the time. Even think about when people go to stand at someone's desk and they're just so focused. Do they turn? Do they focus on? Are they in the moment with that person? When they're out having coffee with someone, are they on their phone? Are they doing so? Like, actually humans have got to pull up their pants a little bit and check ourselves there, because it will come for the ones who aren't good in that space. So I think EQ particularly, and then I would say kind of broadening a little bit, so that kind of learning, curiosity, open-mindedness around keeping kind of ahead of things and being curious and adaptive. So, say you're at your company and they say, does anybody want to trial this new AI tool? Yes, please. Okay, does anybody want to help us look at how we might implement this? Yes, please. If you're one of those people and you're sort of staying ahead, you're showing interest, you're being curious, you're kind of developing those skills, you're the type of leader that's upskilling your team and encouraging their learning curiosity, and looking at ways you can leverage the technology in a way that kind of helps the business. Those are the leaders who are really going to thrive in this environment. Whereas I do know some who are kind of actually even only in their late 40s, early 50s, who are like, oh, I'm just going to ride this out. Like, I'm kind of near the end, closer to the end of my career than the beginning. I'm just going to ride this out. And I'm like, unfortunately, yeah,
What an
this
option.
is still going to hit you in the very short term. So, yeah,
Oh, and
get on board.
it can have massive positive impacts, when we do lean into it and start using it. I think one of the things that I've been thinking about is the productivity load, because I know we talk about this a lot in terms of productivity, and there's so much more to it. But I think with that increase in, for example, as a leader, if I am leveraging technologies of the future, I am going to be more productive. But that means mentally, I'm perhaps thinking about 10 times more things than I was before, even though I'm using technology to support me with the execution of that. So, from a mental load perspective, I guess what I'm thinking is, how do we use technologies without them using us? Because I'm thinking back to the social media revolution and when we got mega connected, when it was amazing. And now we have all these apps on our phone, and it is amazing. And our brains are like, wearing away, basically. They're eroding. We've got brain fog, brain rot, I think it's called now. And so what I'm thinking is, how do we not get into the same space with these amazing technologies that are evolving in this AI evolution? How do we use it and leverage it without using us, and obviously having some of those unintended consequences for our mental health and our kind of burnout as well.
Yeah, I think you look at how it can take the load for you. So there's a lot of people who will put something off that they hate or find difficult or don't know where to start. And that takes up a lot of your brain space because you're mulling it. You're like, every time you think about it, you're like, oh crap, no, I really don't want to do that. And it's taking up that space, right? Whereas if you go, actually, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to just get me started. What's your thoughts on XYZ? Boom. Okay, cool. Okay, now I'm off. A bit like the Pomodoro effect. They talk about that. You do 10 minutes and then you're away, kind of thing. Same sort of thing. You can actually use it to take away that load. So don't stress about it for days. Just get started, and this can sometimes be a helpful starter. It can be a great way of brainstorming. It can be a great way of rationalizing it, and you can also put stuff in there. Kind of to our point before about how it's always going to be flattering and nice to you, and all those kind of things. Not that you don't want it to be like, geez, we can all do with a bit of kind of niceness, flattery, but I will challenge mine. So I'll often say, what are my blind spots? What am I missing? So I think if you start to incorporate that kind of stuff into your prompts, then you're also going to get a more balanced approach. So I'm making sure that it's not always telling me everything's fantastic. I'm like,
Yeah.
How would this really be perceived? If I was trying to say this and I said this, what would this be like? Or if I'm trying to make sure I'm looking at this psychology thing, am I actually applying it properly in this context? So just really getting it to give you that balanced perspective, which is helpful.
Yeah, nice. Oh, look, there's so much in this, and we could talk for hours, right? And we've only just scratched the surface. But what are you kind of up to at the moment? How can people kind of find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, so I usually kind of post random things that I'm looking at or exploring. Recently I've been posting a lot about humanoid robotics. So while everybody's kind of still back on AI, I'm looking at the next wave, which is really going to disrupt things. You think AI is pretty impressive. Wait till you see it in a human form.
Wow.
So humanoid robotics, and then beyond that, which is probably a little bit too much for your average person, is brain-computer interfaces. So technology that, just think eventually, I've always wanted to speak French fluently. With a brain-computer interface in the future, I potentially will be able to.
Wow.
Yeah. So, which actually brings me back to a point you were talking about productivity with AI. One of the things that I would say is companies are sitting on a gold mine. If they actually use AI properly, all of the moaning that they say about productivity, they could completely shift the dial if they taught people how to use it properly and people were enabled to be able to apply it. Because it's actually it's like doubling your capabilities. So things that you might not have been able to do before, you can do through this. So I'm not very good at making things look pretty on stuff. I've got great ideas, but then if I need to, gloss it up and stuff, that's not kind of my thing. I can use AI for that. Other people who are not good at data analytics, they can use AI for that. Other people who don't have great ideas and kind of need a bit of help and then they're kind of away, AI can help with that. Maybe they're not good at planning or structure, or, gosh, I know what I want to do, but I don't know where to start or what the kind of order of things should be. AI can help with that. So if you actually thought of it as that way around what are your weaknesses, skills and capability wise, and how could you leverage AI to support you on that, like you've doubled your capabilities.
Yeah. And that's the magic that exists within this, right? Only if we lean into it, only if we're curious, only if we're using it. And I think that's the kind of message I'm getting, as leaders, this is happening. So get on board and use it in a way that works for you, whilst understanding that people element is always going to be important and always going to be there as well, right?
Yeah. And I think also ramping up in your organization, the critical thinking. So people always send me stuff, right? They'll be like, oh, Melissa, have you seen that? And I'm like, yep, I have seen it, but it's actually AI. It's not actually real. And they're like, oh, damn. Like I'll often get those sorts of things. Or they'll send me some article and I'll say, yeah, I think that's been written by AI. And actually, if you look at the sort that hasn't, that's actually propaganda, like it's not actually real yet. And I can tell you the background behind that. This company's trying to, blah, blah, blah. So that's the critical thinking that we need in our kids coming through the education system, that when they
Yes.
see, something random on the internet, they don't instantly believe we have a new breed of, whatever.
Yes.
And in people context and corporates, yes, get it to be your starter. Yes, get it to help you. Yes, help it shape you or challenge you, but not do everything.
Yeah.
You still need that component on it, and the critical thinking to be able to evaluate, actually, have I thought about it from all angles? Did I challenge AI, or did I just go with the fact they said I was brilliant and then this seems like a great idea? And now that I'm
Yes.
standing in front of the board, I'm not so confident on that idea,
Yeah.
So how can you stretch yourself? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that notion then that it's supporting humans do their role rather than replacing.
Yes.
And that kind
Yes.
of tandem, working in conjunction and leveraging this to do what we do. I think
Yeah.
that's that kind of feels better than the, robots will take all our jobs kind of
Yeah.
fear
Think of it
mongering that
as
can happen.
Yeah, think of it as everybody has an assistant. So, do you want that assistant just sitting there watching you every day? Or do you want to make sure you delegate some stuff, and optimize so that, people always have this percentage of work that they don't thrive doing, and then the other stuff that they just love and they're in the flow of. So, what if you could actually spend most of your time doing the stuff that you absolutely love and are in the flow of, and you got this digital assistant to help you on that other stuff?
Yeah, nice. And that is leverage, real leverage.
Yeah.
So, Melissa, where do people find you? Where's the best place for people to, if they want to continue this corridor and find out more about your work?
Yes, I guess LinkedIn's probably a good one. Or email melissa@techwithheart.co.nz, or my
Fabulous.
website, www.techwithheart.co.nz.
Awesome. And we'll put those in the show notes. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you and picking your brains today, Melissa. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jess.